Good morning, everyone. I cannot express how wonderful it is to see all of you this morning. You will find out in a few moments that the last couple of days have been exhausting, and they've been a wonderfully powerful learning experience, one which actually lends itself to the idea we're beginning to explore today, because today is the start of the sixth and final sacred symbol in our series. But what is that symbol? It is the one. And it's not a symbol per se, but it is the one that landed in my head when this whole series kind of downloaded several months ago. So who am I to question it? You know, it's only after I typed all of that preceding stuff that I realized that I'd already said the word twice before I'd even talked about the symbol. I said one, which was a powerful learning experience, and one is the one that landed in my head. I wonder if that kind of synchronous thing will keep happening throughout these talks. I have a feeling that in the next 5 weeks, we're going to find out that we talk about one far more often than we realize, and maybe we'll also learn that we're practicing it far less than we say it. But hopefully, all of us will also learn how to practice it far more than we say it, and that it will stay that way for the rest of our lives. When the idea of this symbol landed, I wondered, and have been wondering for many weeks now, where we would go. I thought about the physical symbols that represented oneness, so that I could kind of get an idea of what I'd use in the PowerPoint, hoping that it might lead me to some direction. I didn't yet realize all of the many, many, many ways that we human beings have expressed this idea in imagery, though. Certainly there were a few which immediately sprang into my mind. There was the circle, which we already explored first in our first symbol of the series. There's the infinity symbol. There's the tai chi, or yin and yang. There's the Mobius strip, right? It's that fascinating mathematical shape with only one side and only one edge. But there were several symbols which only occurred to me later, like the Pythagorean monad, the Ouroboros, and the seed of life. Of all of those, there are only two which are easily identifiable as spiritual symbols. Those are the tai chi, or the yin and yang, and the seed of life. And we've seen all of those, right? But what you may not realize is that except for the Mobius strip and the infinity symbol, all of them are meant to represent the philosophical or spiritual idea of oneness. Every one of them. However, the fundamental teaching that all is one is echoed across every sacred text which is known to exist. Yes, many, but not all of those texts also state contradictory things which appear to support the idea of division. But when you read them with a discerning eye, you see that there's something sneaky going on with those. Oftentimes, they're acknowledgments of what was happening in society at the time, sometimes to help make sense of it all, or meant to ensure some kind of order in how people move. But all of these symbols and texts mean nothing on their surface unless one takes the time to understand them. They are images and words on a page. It is up to us to determine what they all mean. And the ways that we interpret them is something personal to each of us. So that is where we will begin, with the idea of being only one, individual and apart from everything else. Has anyone ever felt alone? Lonely? Yeah? Okay, how many of you have felt excluded from some group, or maybe felt like excluding someone from yours? Yeah? And how many of you have felt like you're carrying the weight of an incredible burden all alone? Yeah. And we've all heard the phrases that people say to give us hope. It is God's will. God will provide. God will never give you more than you can handle. And although those words may placate us or comfort us in the moment, in the thick of things, we find ourselves feeling like we can't possibly take any more. I know that feeling. We all do, don't we? Yeah. When we're actively in the thick of things, completely overwhelmed and feeling, let's face it, kind of desperate, do we call on the people who've offered to help? Sometimes we might, but especially when things are really, really difficult, do you maybe talk yourself out of asking for help? Maybe you begin to think that you'll be putting your burden on someone else's shoulders. And as soon as you think something like that, that guilt comes up, and you choose most of the time to stay the course alone. Does that sound familiar to anyone? It is a very, very human tendency to do that. Our inspirational readings this morning from the Gospel of John, from Paul's letter to the Romans, and from Ernest Holmes, they all tell us in different ways that we need to rely on each other. That each of us is given different gifts, and when we come together, when we believe with enough conviction that there is a way, that there is a powerful force of creation which shapes everything we experience, nothing is impossible. I know I've told some of you this story, but I don't know if I've ever shared it with all of you in one of my talks. So if you've heard it before, please be patient with me and don't tune out too much because you'll miss a lot. Okay? So when our second son, Connor, was getting close to his 18th birthday, he came to me and he said, while I was very busy writing, I believe it was a Saturday, and he said, "Mom, on my birthday, can we go get a tattoo?" And I went, in my head, I'm like, you are perfect. I made that. Your dad and I put all of that in there. Don't mess it up. But I also knew that he had his own path, and I had to allow his expression. So I said, if you really put thought into what you want and why, I'll take you to get a tattoo within reason. And then he said, no, I mean, can we go get a tattoo? Matching ones. And my eyes got wide. I had never had a speck of ink touch my skin besides the occasional leaky pen or creative doodle of my youth. Besides that, how, pray tell, were we going to agree on matching artwork to be permanently etched onto our skin? So after gathering my wits and starting to breathe again, I took a deep and courageous breath and I said, what do you want to get? And he got quiet for a second. And he said, how about the science of mind symbol? I said, okay, if you can tell me what it means and why. And he was predictably silent. Once they hit their teens, none of my kids wanted to hear about spirituality, especially from Mom. But I knew that I couldn't go through without it being something meaningful to me. A permanent reminder of something significant. So over the next few days, we thought, and we pitched ideas, and we came up with nothing which meant something significant to both of us. So he said, we can get something different as long as we get them together. I was still hesitant, but I thought, okay, maybe I can work with this. So in the end, he chose a picture of a vinyl record with the phrase "Blackbird Fly" over the outside, curving on the top. Blackbird by the Beatles is the very first solo he ever performed in public. And if you've ever heard him sing, it was a great big thing. The boy can sing. All right? I, however, had no clue what to get. And the date was looming. He was born on St. Patrick's Day, so I was very aware that it was drawing near. Everywhere around me, I saw reminders. So I did that thing that I do, and I picked up the Science of Mind, and I took a deep breath, and I closed my eyes, and I opened it. And what was on that page was later etched in my skin. And that is, to the one who can perfectly practice inaction, all things are possible. As you may have guessed, it remains the only tattoo I have. And although I don't usually see it from my vantage point, it's down here where my eyes are not. I haven't regretted it, because it defines how I practiced doing this thing called life 4 years ago. And more significantly, it describes exactly how I move through the world effortlessly today. To simplify it completely, you could say that practice makes perfect, literally. This idea is another one which is found, even if only an abstract or from a once removed pleading perspective, in all faith traditions. It is, in fact, almost identical to the foundational Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which translates to effortless action or actionless action. So what does all of this mean? At first glance, it seems an awful lot like sitting back and disengaging from any action in any direction, doesn't it? You just sit there and let it go by. Remove attachment to everything and let the chips fall where they may. But it actually doesn't mean that at all. It does not mean apathy or laziness. What it does is describe a state of flowing harmony where your actions align perfectly with the natural rhythm of the universe, free from forced resistance and ego struggle, right? And if it sounds passive, well, it is, but it also isn't. It is knowing that all will absolutely be well, and then moving in a way which supports that. I will give you an example, one that is really close to home, like exactly at home, my childhood home. But before I do, I want to let you know that I was very, very, very tired when I was writing all of this down. So it may meander or be a little bit babbly as the story unfolds. Mea culpa, I'm doing the best I can. So most of you know that my dad experienced a medical event back in January, which significantly impacted the way that he lives now. After weeks in hospitals, we were finally able to bring him home in February, but there are a whole lot of changes to his daily life. And there are lots and lots of medical supplies and devices in the living room and dining room and hallway. and in my car. All at my parents' house. And this includes a hospital bed, which, despite a whole lot of physical and occupational therapy, he hasn't yet been able to leave without a lift, a Hoyer lift. My mother literally will not leave his side unless absolutely necessary, like when she prepares meals or she has to take care of, necessary personal needs. She provides round-the-clock care and attention, even when she's given opportunities to step away. My oldest son, Joey, he rents a room there, actually my childhood bedroom, and he has turned down jobs and devoted all of his time to supporting where she needs some extra muscle to get things done. And I'm there when I'm not here or in bed sleeping at home. I'm there so she can get some rest, and she usually sleeps right next to him in her chair. Now, most of you have noticed that as people get older, some can get a little bit slower and more creative in their memory. He is one of those who has always been extraordinarily creative, but now he's also become increasingly blurry as morning moves into noontime, and his creativity and blur kind of max out around bedtime. So on Monday, my mom was kneeling down to clean up after their beloved cat, Shadow, when all of a sudden she had a really sharp pain in her knee, like really sharp. And she, being very strong-willed and steadfast in her stubbornness, she very slowly stood up and resolved to walk it off. But it didn't want to walk off. It kept fluctuating between really painful and moderately uncomfortable until Friday. So on Friday, after doing the invocation for the Barnhart graduation in the morning, I headed over to my parents' house, and I spent the day there. And the plan was that I would stay there until I had to duck out for a 6 o'clock meeting here, but that I'd return when it was over to help with all the nighttime stuff that needed doing for my dad. Joey usually does the pre-bed stuff except for on Mondays, but he had wrenched his back earlier in the week, and he wasn't able to do much, including walk. So I stepped in to cover all week. Now, as you might imagine, when you're unable to get up and move, it can get really uncomfortable. And sometimes that discomfort becomes very painful and increasingly frustrating. That was my dad's experience all day Friday. And he started outwardly demonstrating his emotions in direct proportion to the increase of discomfort and frustration as the day progressed, which meant that my mom and I were really struggling to maintain our patience and our sanity. So the day went on, I went to my meeting as planned, and then I returned to their house to discover that when she'd tried to stand up only moments earlier, like just before I arrived, my mom's knee screamed a very firm and passionately dramatic no. It may have even been an Oscar-worthy knee scream. And it was unwavering in its dedication to that. So we drew straws, and Joey just said he would stay with my dad, painful back and all, while I took my mom to the ER. Now, I'm going to take a break from my story to ask you, how many of you know someone who has worked in an emergency room or a mental health facility or a skilled nursing facility, or they were a police officer or a firefighter or a paramedic? Yeah? Everybody knows someone? Okay. Have any of them ever told you what happens during full moon cycles? Okay, if you are unfamiliar with this phenomenon, let me paint a picture for you of what full moons mean to people who work in those fields or who provide home health care to folks with some kind of impairment. So we pull up to Kaiser around 8:30. I load her into a chair conveniently parked outside, and we walk in to discover that the emergency room, waiting room, is packed like a teeny tiny elevator at an elephant factory at the beginning of lunch hour, okay? There were way too many bodies in too little space, and the hallways outside the ER were just as crowded as far as the eye could see. So we checked in, and we found a standing spot in the center of the room where we waited. And waited. And waited. And yes, after a little while, someone was kind enough to give me a seat. And I was very, very grateful for that, because Joey isn't the only one with some back pain lately. And my sciatic nerve was kind of screaming at that point. About 2 hours in, nobody in that waiting room or hallway had been called back. Not a single person had been called. So the charge nurse finally came out to tell us that they had no open rooms in the back, but that they had closed the ER to ambulances, and they would get each one of us back as soon as each exam room opened up. And then she said, "There are 57 of you waiting right now. So please be patient. We're doing our best." And I looked at my mom and I'm like, several people, predictably, left that first hour, and a few more did the next. And as each hour would pass, although we spent a whole lot of time joking about the situation and getting increasingly slap-happy and dark-humored as time went on, every so often, my mom would get really quiet, and I'd see her worried face emerge. And every time, I would very calmly tell her to stop worrying, because everything was going to be fine. And I meant it. Every time. I knew to the very depths of me that it was all moving harmoniously. There was this kind of still calmness to me, even in the silliness of our fatigue. That calm was almost palpable. Has anyone experienced anything like that before? It's really an incredible thing. So, and already long story, slightly shorter, we were called back just after 2:40 in the morning, and they did all of their tests and took all kinds of pictures and then gave her a preliminary diagnosis, and they drained a whole lot of fluid to relieve pressure and gave her pain meds, which worked wonders, and they gave her a very fancy knee brace, and then they sent us home. So we left there around 5:30 a.m., and we got to watch the sunrise as I headed here to pick up my computer bag that I'd left here, and then drove her home. I walked in the door at my house just as Mike got up around 6:30, and I had been, get this, perfectly and blessedly awake and completely focused that whole night. But as soon as my body hit the bed, sleep just rushed in, and it stayed there from 7 to about 11, so 4 hours-ish. I woke up to discover a text from Joey, which I read with one eye. That's my oldest son, remember. He said, "The ER called. They called Grandma and told her to come back. She took an Uber there. Please come help me when you can. I didn't sleep much, so I'm sitting here frog blinking." Have you ever seen a frog blink? I stopped a minute in my haze, and I thought back, and they go, I thought that was kind of funny. So I waited a little bit until I could think clearly enough to text a coherent reply, which actually took a little bit of time. I tried to reply right then, and I thought I was off to a decent start, but then I wanted to type a new paragraph, so I went to go to the next line, and I ended up hitting the letter P like 50 times, completely unable to figure out why I couldn't go down. So clearly I was not ready to roll out just then. So about 10, 15 minutes later, my mom called to explain everything and said that they drew more fluid to test and gave her the choice of either sticking around and waiting for the lab results or going home and waiting for a call. They thought that there was a possibility that she had an infection. Just so you know, they still haven't called back, which is great news. She wanted nothing more than the comfort of her bed at home, as you can imagine. So I drove over to pick her up from the hospital, and then I took her home so that I could stay with my dad while they slept. So there I sat in the chair beside his bed with, you know those folding TV tray tables, those wooden ones? You do that, and they're like this. I had like 3 of them set up around me, and I'm sitting in the seat of his walker. That's the chair. So I had all my books there, and I had a keyboard from the outside because my letter E keeps popping off on my laptop. So I had an external keyboard and all of the things, and I sat there and I typed while my dad stayed incredibly quiet and cooperative. Again, I don't know if you noticed, but we're in a full moon cycle. So he had every right to go off the rails because of his discomfort, and he didn't. I got all of the inspirational readings done, even though I typed them up a little redundantly. I was about a quarter of the way through today's talk when Joey and my mom got up a little before 8 p.m., 7:45. And my dad was still cooperative and uncomplaining and helpful. Now, I did not just tell you that whole long story to vent my feelings or, lament. I promise you that was not the case. I told you that because it shows exactly what happens when one person perfectly practices inaction. Each of us individually believed, despite occasional moments of worry, that everything would be just fine. And then we did everything we were capable of to flow with the universe, giving our skills and our support without question or hesitation or complaint. And although it really was still exhausting, all 4 of us made it through a situation which might have caused others to panic and give up hope, or feel completely overwhelmed and decide to carry the burden alone out of misplaced concern for others. And let me say here that denying yourself much needed care out of concern for others is misplaced. You have to take care of yourself, even when it means asking for help. Paul's letter to the Romans perfectly explains how to move in times of challenge. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, by means of reasonable service. Do not imitate the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. For I say, through the grace which is given to me, to all of you, not to think of yourselves beyond what you ought to think, but think soberly, everyone according to the measure of faith which God has distributed to them. For as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same function, so we, being many, are one body in Christ. We did exactly that. Each of us, according to our individual skills and gifts and abilities, gave in ways which revealed that moving in harmony with the flow of life will invariably ensure balance, peace, and serenity. Yes, every one of us was and still is tired, but we never stopped being kind to each other. Not for a moment. We never prioritized our exhaustion over others. Yet we also didn't deny the support they offered when they were able to give us a break. We each could have stood alone doing only that which we were directly asked to do, or trying to do everything ourselves and shutting each other out when help was offered. And we would have all sat through a very different talk today. My point, my friends, is this. Although you may feel like a single soul trapped in a body which keeps you separate from everyone else, and you may sometimes feel like you shouldn't allow or accept or ask for help when it's offered during times of challenge, the truth is this: you are not alone. You are not separate. There's nothing that you are meant to bear alone when help is offered. Perfectly practiced in action. Trusting that all is well, then accepting all of the amazing ways that we and others are called to help as life ebbs and flows, is how that individual solitary one gives way to a oneness, which includes everyone, everything, everywhere. Move as you are called. Demonstrate the unique function you have in the one body of humanity. And like Paul says, allow others to move to help you as they are called. It is how we are meant to be. Please remember that. In the words of our dear Reverend Paul, you are enough. You are loved. And you are not alone. You never have been. Amen.